First up, Prince William wants his homeless project to become mainstream. On Friday, the Prince of Wales continued his mission to demonstrate homelessness can be ended in the United Kingdom.
Prince William never expected a simple church visit to turn into an unforgettable moment. As he stood in the quiet chapel, a little girl suddenly stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with questions, and her voice trembled as she spoke. She asked something so deep that it made the future king shocked. Then, something that no one expected happened. What did the little girl ask? And why did Prince William's answer bring her to tears? Join us as we uncover the unforgettable moment. A little girl asks Prince William about God, and his response brought her to tears. A little girl's question shocks Royal Prince. The soft light from the candles danced on the old stone walls of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. The tall windows were filled with bright, colorful sunlight, painting soft patterns on the wooden seats. The air smelled like fresh flowers and old books, and the quiet sound of the choir singing filled the church. Prince William stood near the front, dressed neatly in a suit, his hands resting in front of him. He had come for a special church service to pray. The chapel had been a place of prayer for kings and queens for hundreds of years. But something unexpected happened. Among the congregation, a little girl sat with her feet barely touching the floor. Her name was Diana. She held an old Bible close to her chest. She had been listening carefully, but there was something in her heart that she needed to say. Diana had been thinking about it for a long time. Every night, she had whispered the words to herself, waiting for the right moment. She looked up at her father, who sat beside her, but he did not notice the way her eyes filled with quiet bravery. She could not hold back her words any longer. Slowly, she stood. At first, no one noticed. The choir's soft voices carried through the halls. But when she took a small step forward towards the front row, people started to notice her, including her father. The guards standing near the royal prince looked at each other as they were not sure of what to do. Prince William saw her. His blue eyes settled on the little girl walking toward him with her Bible. The prince did not move. He only watched as she came closer, her face filled with something no one else could understand. Then, in a small but clear voice, Diana asked Prince William about God. This question was not about the royal family. It was not about the castle. It came straight from her heart. Prince William's face changed. His warm smile was still there, but there was something new in his eyes now, something deeper. The room no longer felt the same. All that mattered was a little girl in a red dress, standing before a prince, waiting for an answer. Prince William looked at Diana and knew he had to give her something real. What was his response? An heavyweight question. Prince William stood still, the weight of Diana's question pressing against him. The chapel that previously was filled with quiet whispers and soft music now felt different. Everyone in the room were watching him, waiting for his response. Diana's small hands gripped her Bible, holding it close like it was the most important thing in the world. Her red dress, the one her mother had picked for her, barely moved as she stood there. Prince William had answered many questions in his life. People had asked him about his duties, his family, the future of the country. But this was different. This was a question that reached straight into the heart. He took a slow breath, looking at the little girl before him. There was something about her eyes that reminded him of the past. For a moment, he was no longer standing inside the great chapel. His mind went back to a time when he was just a boy, sitting in a church. He remembered holding his mother's hand, listening to her gentle voice as she spoke about kindness and faith. Prince William's mother, Princess Diana, had always told him that faith was about feeling something deep inside, something that stayed with her even when times were hard. The little girl was still waiting, her eyes full of hope. He knelt slightly so that he was closer to her height, saying when he was her age, he had many questions, just like her. He said his mother used to tell him that God listens in ways he might not always understand. He continued by saying sometimes, God answers with words, and sometimes he answers through the people around them. and God answers with silence, and we have to listen with our hearts. Prince William said when he lost his mother, he asked God a question, just like Diana did. He wanted to know why things happened the way they did. For a long time, the royal prince thought he would never get an answer. But then, he realized something. The future king realized that his mother's love never left me. The little girl looked down at her Bible, then looked at him. He said that God listens to every question, even when they do not get an answer, but sometimes the answer is already inside them. A single tear rolled down Diana's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, not because she was sad, but because she understood something new. The silence in the chapel was full, warm, alive. But the little girl was not done with her questions, and this time, the question was personal. But how would a prince, raised under royal traditions, handle such a deeply personal question? A personal question that felt deep. While Prince William stood in front of Diana, her eyes were filled with more questions. She had listened carefully to every word he said, but she was not done with her questions. She had something else on her mind. The little girl asked Prince William if he ever feel lost. This was not a question of simple curiosity. It was a question of the heart, a question that pulled something deep inside him. He looked around the room, seeing the faces of those watching, but he knew his answer was not for them. It was for her. He admitted that he had felt lost before, and there have been times when he did not know what to do or what to believe. Diana listened as she wanted to understand him. Prince William continued. He said there was a time when he was not sure where to find God. He thought that maybe God was far away, watching from a distance. He wondered why God let certain things happen, and the reason some prayers looked like they were not answered to. For a moment, he thought of his younger years where he had questions that had no clear answers. He had been raised with faith, taught to pray, but there were moments when faith had felt like something out of reach. He then looked at the little girl and said he learned something. Faith is not about always having the answers. It is about holding something bigger than what he feared. It is about trusting even when he did not understand everything. Diana was standing in front of the royal prince, trying to understand his response. He said when he was younger, his mother showed him what faith looked like. Not just through words, but through kindness. Through the way she cared for people, even when no one was watching. She believed that love and goodness were signs that God was near. Diana thought about her own mother's words, the way she had spoken about faith in quiet moments she died. Prince William admitted that he did not always see it at the time, but looking back, he finally understood that faith is not something they have to see with our eyes. It is something they feel, something they carry even in the hardest times. The little girl then asked that even when they do not hear God, even when they do not feel Him, will God still be there? Prince William nodded and answered that sometimes He speaks through the kindness of others. Sometimes He speaks through memories, through moments that remind him that he is not alone. Diana was still young, still learning, but something in his words gave her peace. Prince William took a slow step back, letting her process what he had said. He knew faith was not something that could be forced or rushed. It was something that grew in its own time. The people in the room remained silent, not because they were waiting for more, but because they knew they had just witnessed something rare. The little girl looked at her Bible, running her fingers across its cover. She looked up at Prince William again, this time with another question, but there was still one thing she needed to hear from him. Diana gathered her thoughts, then asked the question that brought Prince William back to one of the hardest moments of his life. What was it? The weight of losing someone special. The moment between Prince William and the little girl had become something far deeper than anyone had expected. It was no longer just a conversation. It was something that reached into the past, into the places where grief had once lived. There was something they both had in common. Though years separated them, though their lives were different, there was one thing they both understood, and that was loss. The little girl was about to ask another question. Then her father walked up to her. As he apologized to the prince, saying her daughter had just lost her mother, the little father pleaded. But Prince William did not speak right away. There was a deep look in his eyes, as if the words he needed to say had been waiting for years. He had been where she was. He had felt the same emptiness, the same quiet ache that never fully disappeared. It was a sadness they both felt and understood. He had once been a boy, standing in front of the world, carrying a grief too heavy for his young heart. The memory of walking behind his mother's coffin, the weight of the world's eyes on him, had never faded. It had been one of the loneliest moments of his life, though he had never truly been alone. Losing a mother was not just about the moment she was gone. It was about every day after. It was about looking for her in the places she used to be. It was about waiting for her voice, even when he knew it would not come. And yet somehow, she had never truly left him. There were days when the prince could still hear her laugh in the back of his mind. There were moments when he could almost feel her standing beside him. He had learned slowly that love did not disappear. There was a reason he had chosen to live his life a certain way. It was because of her, because of the love his mother had left behind, the kindness she had shown, the belief that doing good in the world was the most important thing a person could do. And now, standing here, looking at a little girl who had also known that kind of loss, he understood something. He was not just answering a question. He was giving her the same reassurance he had once searched for himself. The people in the chapel felt the weight of his words, though many of them had already known his story. They had seen him grow up, had watched him carry his grief with quiet strength. But this was different. This was not a prince speaking to a crowd. This was a man sharing something real with a child who needed to hear it. Diana did not say anything, but there was something in her face that showed she understood. She still felt her mother's love. Prince William had given her something without even realizing it. He had shown her that grief did not mean forgetting, but there was still one piece missing. As Diana listened, something deep inside her made her think of the words her own mother used to say. But there was someone whose words helped Prince William stay strong after losing his mother. Who was this person, and how did these words help him during such a difficult time? The words of Queen Elizabeth. While the weight of the past had been with him for a long time, there was someone whose word helped Prince William stay strong. These were words spoken by a woman who had carried the weight of a crown and the expectations of a nation. His grandmother had lived through times of war, loss, and change. She had seen the world changed and watched as history was written before her eyes. Through it all, she had remained strong, not because she had never known doubt or fear, but because she had chosen to hold on to something greater, and that was faith. There were moments, even in the quiet of the palace, when the Queen had reminded him that faith was something she lived. She had spoken of it not as a duty, but as a source of comfort to Prince William. He remembered being a boy, sitting beside her as she read from the same book she had held since she was young. She had told him that faith was not about always knowing the answers. It was about standing firm even when the path ahead was not clear. There were nights when he had struggled with questions he did not know how to ask. His grandmother had never forced him to speak before he was ready, but when he did, her words had been simple. Through every Christmas speech, every time she knelt in prayer, every time she comforted someone in sorrow, there was a time, after his mother's passing, when he had asked how she remained strong and how she carried so much weight without breaking. She smiled and replied that she never carried the weight alone. Her faith had been her strength. She had shown him that true leadership was about service and not just about power. And now, standing in the church, those words lived inside him. Those words helped him become the man he is. Those words taught him that faith was not about being free from hardship, but about finding peace in the middle of it. The little girl had listened to every word, but what happened next was something no one expected. How did she react to the answers she got from the royal prince? The girl's emotional reaction. As the weight of Prince William's words settled into the hearts of everyone present, the air carried something deep. It was the kind of moment that could not be planned, the kind that left a mark long after it had passed. The little girl had listened to every word, holding them close, letting them fill the spaces left behind by loss. For so long, she had carried questions too big for someone her age, questions that had followed her through the nights when sleep did not come. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt understood. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Not the kind that came from sadness, but the one that came from something too big to hold inside. She lowered her head for a moment, her small shoulders trembling, as the emotions she had tried to keep hidden finally broke free. It was not weakness. It was something else entirely. There was no need for anyone to ask why she was crying. Every person watching understood because, at some point in their lives, they had felt it too. The pain of missing someone. Prince William did not step back. He did not rush to fill the silence. He stood there, letting her feel everything she needed to, giving her space to ease the weight of her grief. Tears were wiped away, but the warmth left behind by his words did not fade. There was a shift, not just in the little girl, but in those who had been watching. Grief had brought them together, but something else now held them in place. For the first time in a long while, the sadness did not feel so heavy. The memories did not feel so distant. And the love that had once seemed lost felt closer than ever. The little girl lifted her head while her father was holding her. She had come with questions, and though there were still things she did not fully understand, she now carried something far more important than answers. She carried peace. As she wiped the last of her tears away, the little girl looked at Prince William once more. But what was the reaction of everyone present in the church? A lesson for everyone present. While the church remained still, there was something in the air that changed. The little girl had come forward with nothing but a question, but now, the weight of her words had reached every person present. What had begun as a simple church service had become something that was not planned for. It was in the quiet that people began to reflect. Some had come into the chapel carrying burdens of their own, worries that they ever spoke of, losses they had never fully accepted. They had expected to listen, to observe, to be part of a moment that belonged to someone else. But now, it belonged to all of them. Some of the older faces in the crowd were lost in thought. They had lived long enough to know that grief does not vanish, that time does not erase pain. But in this sacred space, they were reminded that love is never truly gone. Parents in the church held their children a little closer. They had spent years trying to protect them from sorrow. But now, they saw something different. They saw that grief was not something to fear. It was proof that love had been real. Even those who had never known such loss felt the weight of the lesson before them. They had learned that faith was not about having all the answers, but about knowing where to place one's trust. That hope was not about ignoring sorrow, but about believing that light could still be found even in the hardest moments. Prince William had spoken from the heart, but it was the little girl who had reminded them why those words mattered. She had shown them that courage was not found in silence, but in speaking from a place of truth. What had started as a question had become a lesson for everyone in the chapel, a reminder that even the deepest pain could be met with understanding, that even the heaviest loss could be carried with grace. The air was no longer filled with sadness. It carried something else now, something unspoken yet deeply understood. But even as the service was about to end, one final moment remained. As the time came for Prince William to step back, he paused for just a second longer. There had been many moments in his life where duty had called him forward, where his words had been chosen carefully, his actions measured. But this had been different. This had not been about tradition or responsibility. It had been about something far more personal. The little girl had carried something that had reached far beyond her own question. She had given something to the people around her, something that would not be forgotten once they stepped beyond the chapel doors. The prince had seen many faces in his life, had shaken countless hands, had answered questions from reporters and world leaders. But this moment, this child, would stay with him. And as he turned to leave, the little girl lifted her face once more. There were no more questions, no more words left to say. As the doors of the chapel slowly opened, the people inside stepped forward, carrying with them something they had not expected to find. A lesson they had not known they needed. And as the little girl walked back to her seat, she carried something too. Not just the memory of the words she had heard, but the quiet knowledge that her voice had mattered, that her question had changed something, and in the end, love was never truly lost. What do you think about Prince William's heartfelt response and the little girl's courage to ask such a deep question? Did his words bring comfort to her in a way she never expected? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.